Let me tell you about the place I used to live. The building was called the Beacon, which, in hindsight, is a pretty sick joke. But back then, it felt right. It was one of those new, sleek high-rises in the city, the kind that promises security and a certain lifestyle. And for the first year, it delivered. I mean, you couldn't even get to the elevators without a key fob. There was always a guard at the front desk, usually a friendly guy named Frank who knew everyone's name and probably their dog's name, too. My apartment was on the 12th floor, apartment 12A. It was my little sanctuary, high above the noise of the streets. You know how some buildings are superstitious? They skip the 13th floor. The Beacon was one of them. In the elevator, the panel went from 11, 12, straight to 14. I remember thinking it was a bit silly, a modern glass and steel tower clinging to an old-world fear, but I didn't question it. It was just a fact of the building, like the floor-to-ceiling windows or the slightly too expensive rent. I felt safe there, genuinely, deeply safe. It was the kind of safety you pay a premium for in a city like this. The kind that lets a young woman living alone sleep with the balcony door cracked open on warm nights. That evening started like any other. I got home from work around 7, feeling that familiar end-of-day exhaustion. I swiped my fob, the glass doors hissed open, and the cool, sterile air of the lobby hit me. Frank was at the desk, looking at his phone, and gave me his usual wave and a, "Have a good night, Anne." I smiled back. "You too, Frank." On the way to the elevator bank, I passed the community bulletin board. It was a mess of takeout menus, ads for dog walking services, and official notices from management printed on crisp letterhead. Tacked near the middle, a little crooked and faded, was a missing person flyer. I'd seen it before, but my brain had mostly learned to edit it out, the way you learn to ignore car alarms. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe a few years older than me, with a wide, friendly smile. Her name was Sarah. The flyer said she'd been missing for a few weeks and was last seen in the area. I felt a brief, familiar pang of sadness. A whole person, with a life and friends and a favorite coffee order, just gone. But then the elevator dinged, and the thought was gone, too. It was a big city, after all. These things happened, tragically and anonymously. They happened to other people. In the elevator, I rode up with Mrs. Gable from 10B. She had a little terrier that always yapped at my ankles. We did the usual neighborly small talk. The weather, how the dog's allergies were acting up. It was all so normal, so mundane. It was the wallpaper of my life in that building. Safe, predictable, boring. I loved it. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Clean, quiet, my little nest. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and padded over to the window. The view was the best part of the whole place. From the 12th floor, the city spread out like a circuit board of glittering lights. It made me feel like I was on top of the world, untouchable. I went through my routine, changed into sweats, put on some music, and started making a simple pasta for dinner. The sounds of my evening were my own, the clatter of a pan, the running water, the low hum of the refrigerator. It was peaceful. After eating, I settled onto the couch with a book, the city lights twinkling outside. That's when I heard it for the first time that night. It was a sound from above, a faint, intermittent scraping. It sounded heavy, like someone was dragging a piece of furniture with cloth wrapped around the legs across a bare concrete floor. A slow, rhythmic shish thump, shish thump. I paused, listening. My first thought was simple. My upstairs neighbor was rearranging his living room. He was a quiet finance guy the first rarely saw, but maybe he'd bought a new couch or something. It was a little late for that kind of work, almost 10 o'clock, but not unheard of. I shrugged it off and went back to my book. But the sound didn't stop. It would go on for a minute, then silence. Then it would start again, seeming to come from a different part of the ceiling this time. Shish thump, shish thump. There was something about the rhythm that was unsettling. It wasn't the energetic, purposeful sound of someone redecorating. It was slow, measured, almost laborious. I'd heard noises from upstairs before. Faint music, the occasional dropped object. Standard apartment living, but this was different. This was the third or fourth time I'd heard this specific dragging sound in the past couple of weeks. Always late at night, always stopping the moment I started to really focus on it. I'd always just dismissed it. But tonight, in the deep quiet of my apartment, it felt clearer. More present. I muted the music. The silence that rushed in was thick. I waited, and there it was again. Shish thump. It sounded like it was directly over my head, in the center of what would be my neighbor's living room. An image came to my mind, unbidden. Someone dragging a heavy sack, something limp and unwieldy. I shook my head, annoyed with myself. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. It was just a guy moving furniture. That was the only logical explanation. The building was solid, concrete and steel. Sound could travel in weird ways. The guy on 14 could be the one making the noise, for all I knew. There was no one on 13. Tang 13 Kong Tun Tai. The floor above me was the 14th floor. I repeated that to myself like a mantra. The floor above me is 14. The sound stopped for good a few minutes later, and the normal, comfortable silence of my apartment returned. I finished a chapter of my book, brushed my teeth, and got ready for bed. The unease had mostly faded, replaced by the familiar promise of sleep. My life was safe. My building was secure. My imagination was just overactive. Before turning in, I did one last thing I always did. I walked out onto my small balcony to take in the night air. The city breeze was cool and felt good on my skin. I leaned on the railing, looking down at the street 12 floors below. The cars were just streams of red and white light. The people were tiny, anonymous specks. And then my eyes caught movement in the service alley that ran alongside the building. It was a part of the property I rarely looked at, mostly just a place for dumpsters and delivery trucks. But standing there, half hidden in the deep shadows cast by the building itself, was a man. He was wearing a dark blue uniform, like the ones the building's maintenance crew wore, but it looked old, a size too big for him. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't smoking, or on his phone, or waiting for a truck. He was just standing there, perfectly still. And he was looking up. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see his face from this distance, just the dark shape of him and the pale oval where his face should be. But I could feel where he was looking. His gaze was directed upwards, not scanning the whole building, but fixed. Fixed on the section where my apartment was. On my floor, maybe right at my balcony. A cold prickle went down my spine. It was probably nothing. He was probably just a night shift worker taking a break. But why stand in the dark? Why stare up so intently? I'd been living here for over a year. I knew the day shift guys by sight. I'd never seen this man before. I squinted, trying to make out any detail. As if he could feel my eyes on him, he took a single, deliberate step backward. He didn't turn and walk away. He just retreated, melting back into the deeper darkness of the alley until he was completely swallowed by it. One moment he was there, a solid, unsettling presence. The next, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, my heart beating a little too fast. The air didn't feel so fresh anymore. I scanned the alley, but it was empty, just shadows and dumpsters. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was a coincidence. But as I backed away from the railing and slid the glass door shut, making sure to flick the lock into place, I couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that the safety I had paid for, the safety I had built my life around, was just an illusion. And for the first time since I'd moved into the Beacon, I felt watched. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy. I went to work. I bought groceries. I called my mom and told her everything was fine. I tried to bury the memory of the man in the alley, to file it away as a weird, one-off event. A city is full of strange people, I told myself. It meant nothing. I convinced myself that the dragging sound from upstairs was just my overactive imagination, triggered by the missing person flyer and the general stress of living alone. I needed to believe it, because the alternative was unthinkable. The Beacon was my safe space. It had to be. The incident that changed everything happened on a Thursday. It had been one of those brutal days at the office, a project deadline that had us all pulling a late night. By the time I finally left, it was well past 11. The city was still buzzing, but it was the late-night hum, a different energy from the daytime rush. I was exhausted down to my bones. All I could think about was crawling into bed. The lobby was empty when I arrived. Frank's shift had ended hours ago. The night guard, a guy the first didn't know well, was doing his rounds somewhere. The building was deeply, profoundly quiet. The only sound was the soft click of my heels on the polished marble floor. I swiped my fob, heard the familiar electronic chirp, and the glass doors to the elevator bank slid open. It felt like coming home. The last step of the journey. I stepped into one of the two elevators. It was empty, of course. The interior was all brushed steel and soft, recessed lighting, smelling faintly of the cleaner the maintenance crew used. It was the smell of safety. I pressed the button for my floor. Number 12. The little plastic circle lit up with a satisfying glow, and the doors slid shut with a smooth, expensive hiss, sealing me inside my little metal box. The ascent was normal at first. The gentle hum, the slight pressure in my ears. The numbers on the digital display above the door lit up in sequence. 4, 5, 6. I leaned my head back against the cool steel wall, closing my eyes for just a second, picturing my bed. My mind was already there, tangled in my sheets. 7, 8, 9. I opened my eyes, watching the numbers climb. A familiar, comforting routine. 10, 11. I straightened up, readying my keys in my pocket for the short walk down the hall. I watched the display, expecting the 12 to light up, for the elevator to slow and stop with that gentle bump I knew so well. But it didn't. The elevator didn't slow down. It just kept going up. The number 11 stayed lit for a second too long, and then it was gone, but 12 never appeared. The elevator was still moving, a quiet, steady ascent. My first thought wasn't fear. It was annoyance. A full body, a long day just got longer sigh of annoyance. Great. The elevator's on the fritz. I'd probably end up on the 14th floor and have to ride it back down. A minor inconvenience, nothing more. I looked at the panel of buttons. The light for 12 was still on, a patient, glowing promise that the elevator was completely ignoring. Then the main lights in the cabin flickered. They went out for a full second, plunging me into absolute, disorienting blackness. And in that second of darkness, the soft hum of the elevator changed. It became a lower, rougher sound. A grinding. Then the lights came back on, but they were dimmer now, casting a sick, yellowish glow. My heart started to beat a little faster. This felt different from a simple malfunction. I looked up at the digital display again. It was no longer showing numbers. It was a scramble of red digital lines, like a corrupted file. It flickered and spasmed, and for a horrible moment, I thought I saw the number 88 flash, maybe 66. It was impossible to tell. The glitching lines seemed to ride, and then, with a final, jarring flicker, they resolved into a single, clean shape. A number, 13. It glowed in a bright, blood red that seemed to burn into the dim air of the elevator. My breath hitched in my chest. No, that wasn't possible. I knew this building. I knew this elevator. I had ridden it hundreds of times. There was no 13th floor. The button panel, the physical panel, went from 12 to 14. There was no 13. My eyes snapped down to the panel, and my blood went cold. It was there, between the button for 12 and the button for 14, in a space that had always been a smooth, blank stretch of stainless steel, was a new button. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't a clean, factory-made circle. It looked crude, like it had been pushed out from behind the panel. The edges were slightly warped, and it was glowing with the same hellish red light as the number on the display. It pulsed, slowly, a sick heartbeat. Okay, now I was scared. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs. My mind raced, trying to find a logical handhold in a situation that was rapidly losing all logic. A prank? Some elaborate, stupid prank? A maintenance mode I'd never seen? But who, and why? The elevator was still moving, but it was slowing down. I lunged for the control panel. My first instinct was to stop it, to regain some control. I jammed my finger on the "door open" button. Nothing. The button was completely dead. It didn't click. It didn't light up. It was just a useless piece of plastic. Panic started to bubble up in my throat, hot and sharp. I hit the button for my own floor, 12, again and again. Nothing. 11, 10, lobby. I hammered my fist on them, the dull thud of my knuckles against steel the only response. They were all dead, every single one, except for that glowing red 13. My breathing grew ragged. I spun around, looking for the emergency panel. It was beside the door. A little metal flap. I pried it open with my fingernail. Inside were two buttons, the emergency stop and the alarm bell. Hope surged through me. This would work. This had to work. I pushed the alarm bell button. Silence. Not a ring. Not a buzz. Not even a click. The silence in the elevator was suddenly immense, suffocating. It pressed in on me, amplifying the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. I slammed my thumb onto the red, mushroom-shaped emergency stop button. I pushed it with all my weight. It didn't move. It was completely rigid, as if it were a solid piece of steel welded to the panel. And then, the elevator stopped. It didn't jolt, it just arrived, a smooth, final cessation of movement. The grinding sound ceased, the red 13 on the display burned bright and steady. The sickeningly calm silence returned. For a moment, nothing happened. I stood frozen in the middle of the small space, my back to the door, staring at the control panel that had betrayed me. I was trapped in a metal box that had taken me to a place that didn't exist. My mind was screaming, a high-pitched internal shriek. This isn't real. This is a dream, a nightmare. I'm overtired. I'm going to wake up in my bed. Then I heard the sound. It wasn't a sound I recognized from anywhere else in the building. It wasn't a sound a normal elevator made. It was a single, pure, musical note. Ting, the familiar chime of arrival. The sound that should have meant safety, home, the end of the journey. But now, it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard in my life. It was the sound of a destination reached. I didn't dare to turn around. I kept my eyes locked on the glowing 13, praying that if I didn't look, it wouldn't be real. I could hear a low hum, the sound of a mechanism engaging. A groan of metal on metal. Slowly, deliberately, the doors behind me began to open. A crack of darkness appeared. It wasn't the warm, carpeted hallway of the residential floors. It was pitch black. A sliver of cold, stale air slithered into the cabin, carrying a smell I had never encountered inside the beacon. It was the smell of damp earth, of wet concrete, of dust that had been undisturbed for years. The smell of a tomb. The doors continued their slow, grinding retreat into the walls, the crack of darkness widening. I was paralyzed, pinned in place by a terror so absolute it felt like a physical weight. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, I could only stand there, my reflection a pale, terrified ghost in the brushed steel, as the elevator continued to open, revealing the impossible, waiting darkness of the 13th floor. The doors slid all the way open with a final, groaning shudder, revealing the source of the smell. It wasn't a hallway, not really, it was a concrete shell, a construction site frozen in time. The floor was rough, unpolished cement, stained with dark patches of moisture. Rebar skeletons poked out from unfinished walls, and thick bundles of wires, red and yellow and blue, hung from the ceiling like dead vines. There was no carpet, no decorative lighting, no apartment doors. Just a long, dark tunnel of raw, gray concrete. And the air, God, the air, it wasn't just stale, it was thick. You could almost taste the dust, the dampness, the metallic tang of rust. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed off from the sun and the wind for a very, very long time. About halfway down the corridor, a single, bare bulb hung from a long cord. It flickered erratically, casting spastic, dancing shadows that made the whole place seem to twitch and breathe. Each flash of pale, buzzing light offered a brief, horrifying snapshot of the dereliction before plunging the hallway back into near-total darkness. It was in one of these flashes that I saw the construction debris piled against the walls, stacks of drywall, buckets of hardened spackle, discarded tools. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile this place with the beacon, my safe, modern, polished building. This couldn't be part of it. It was like the elevator had punched through the wall of reality and opened into some forgotten, rotten space between the floors. My first coherent thought wasn't about ghosts or monsters. It was a raw, animal instinct. Close the door. My hand, slick with sweat, shot out and slammed the door close button. The plastic square depressed under my thumb, but there was no response. No hum of a motor, no movement from the heavy steel doors. It was just a dead piece of plastic. I hit it again, and again, and again. My panic escalated with each useless press, the dull thud of my thumb against the panel the only sound. I spun to the emergency panel, my fingers fumbling with the little metal flap again. Alarm bell. I pressed it. I held it down. Nothing. The silence in the elevator was an active, malevolent thing now. It was pressing in on me, mocking my efforts. I was trapped. I was standing in a brightly lit steel box that was open to a tomb, and I was utterly, completely trapped. I was a specimen in a jar, the lid off, exposed to a contaminated world. I backed away from the open doorway until my shoulders hit the cool steel of the back wall. My body was half in the yellowish safety of the elevator light, half in the encroaching darkness of the impossible hallway. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that flickering bulb, from the monstrous shadows it created. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, and the sound of it seemed deafening in the quiet. And then I heard it. It started so quietly I thought I was imagining it, that it was just the buzz of the faulty light or the frantic pounding of blood in my ears. It was a sound from the far end of the hallway, from deep within the darkness beyond the flickering bulb. A soft, dragging sound. Chef, like someone pulling a heavy burlap sack across rough concrete. It was a wet, heavy sound. And it was rhythmic. Chef, pause. Chef, pause. My mind, desperate for a logical anchor, grasped at straws. A janitor. It had to be a janitor. This is a forgotten service floor, a technical level, and some poor guy is on the late shift, dragging a heavy bag of trash. It was a stupid, flimsy explanation, but it was all I had. I clung to it like a life raft. Hello? I called out. My voice was a thready, pathetic thing. It didn't carry. It just seemed to die in the thick, dusty air right in front of my face. Is someone there? The elevator is stuck. There was no reply, only the sound. Chef, pause. Chef, pause. It was closer now, definitely closer. The pauses between the drags were shorter. The sound itself was getting clearer. It wasn't just the soft drag of a bag. There was a scrape to it now. A light, high-pitched scree of something hard, a button, maybe, or a belt buckle, catching on the uneven floor. Scrape, shush fffffff, pause. Scrape, shush fffffff, pause. The rhythm was maddening. It was the sound of a purpose. Steady, relentless, unhurried. This wasn't someone just doing a job. This was the sound of something approaching. The flickering bulbs seemed to pulse in time with my own racing heart. Flash, flash, flash. Each time the light came on, I squinted, trying to pierce the oppressive darkness at the end of the hall. I saw nothing, just the deep, impenetrable black. But the sound kept coming. I had to move. I had to do something. But what? Where could I go? Run into that nightmare hallway? Stay in the metal trap that had brought me here? My feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. All I could do was stand there, pinned by terror, listening to the approach of the unknown. Scrape, shush fffffff. It was just past the flickering bulb now. I knew it, I could feel it. The sound was originating from a place just on the edge of the light, in the deepest part of the shadows. My whole body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shiver. The janitor theory was long gone, burned away by a primal fear I had never known was possible. Janitors don't work in total darkness. Janitors don't ignore a call for help. The bulb buzzed loudly, once. And then, flash. For a split second, the light was brighter than before, a brilliant white. And in that fraction of a second, I saw it. A shape, a human shape, tall and broad. It was standing just on the other side of the hanging bulb, its form a stark, black silhouette against the brief, bright light. It was perfectly still. The light died, plunging the hallway into darkness again. But the sound was gone. The dragging had stopped. The silence that rushed back in was 1,000 times worse. It was an observant silence. A waiting silence. Breathe in, breathe. My brain was screaming at me, but my lungs wouldn't obey. I was holding my breath, listening for anything. A footstep, a cough, a word, nothing. Just the frantic thumping in my chest and the low-voltage hum of the elevator's emergency lights. The bulb overhead started to flicker again, faster this time. Spastic, unpredictable. It was like a dying nerve ending. Flicker. He was there, the silhouette, unmoving, darkness. I could hear a new sound now, a soft squeak, the sound of a rubber-soled boot shifting its weight on dusty concrete. Flicker. He was closer. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they would break. He had moved. In that half-second of darkness, he had closed 10 feet of the distance between us. He wasn't a silhouette anymore. The weak light caught details. He was a man. He was wearing what looked like a mechanic's or a maintenance worker's faded blue jumpsuit. It was stained and dark around the collar and cuffs. His head was tilted slightly, as if he were curious. Studying me. Darkness. The squeak of a boot again. Louder. Flicker. He was at the light now. Directly under it. His face was still cast in shadow by the hanging bulb, but I could see his arms. One arm was hanging limp at his side. The other was holding the source of the sound. He was gripping the bunched-up end of a huge, heavy-duty canvas tarp. The kind they use to cover furniture when you move, or to wrap something up. The rest of it trailed on the floor behind him, a lumpy, indistinct shape in the gloom. He just stood there. He wasn't looking at the elevator. He was looking right at me. And he wasn't saying a word. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the buzzing half-light of the hallway. You know how in movies, a character will freeze, and the camera will pan around them? It felt like that, except I wasn't an actor on a set. I was stuck in a metal box, and the monster wasn't a guy in a rubber suit. He was real, and he was right there. He stood under that flickering bulb, the light catching the grease stains on the shoulders of his blue jumpsuit, turning them shiny. His face was blank. That's the only word for it. No anger, no malice, not even curiosity. It was the face of someone looking at an object, not a person. Like I was a piece of furniture he had to move. And it was that nothingness, that complete lack of human expression, that terrified me more than any snarling monster ever could. My brain was still trying to find a logical explanation. It was a stupid, pointless exercise, but it's what we do, right? We try to fit the impossible into a box we can understand. He's a maintenance worker. He's clearing out old junk. He's deaf, that's why he didn't answer. He's just surprised to see the elevator open. Every excuse I came up with sounded paper thin, even inside my own head. No maintenance worker does this kind of job in the pitch dark, on a floor that doesn't exist. And no maintenance worker drags something that heavy, with that wet, dragging sound, wrapped in a canvas tarp. The lumpy shape behind him was the source of all the other fears my brain was too polite to name. It was long, about the size of a person, and there was a dark, wet-looking stain that had soaked through a patch of the canvas near one end. We just stood there, locked in this bizarre standoff. Him in the flickering, dying light of the hallway, and me in the sterile, too bright light of the elevator. The silence was a physical thing. It pressed in on my ears, making them ring. My own breathing sounded like a hurricane, harsh and ragged. I was convinced he could hear my heart, that it was thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird beating itself to death against the bars of its cage. I tried to swallow, but my throat was bone dry. I didn't dare make a sound. I didn't dare scream. I had this primal, animal instinct that if I made any sudden noise, it would be over. That whatever this slow, strange dance was, a scream would be the signal for it to end, and not in my favor. He hadn't moved a muscle, just watched me. His stillness was what was so deeply unnerving. It wasn't the stillness of surprise. It was the stillness of patience. The stillness of a spider in its web, feeling the first ever twitch of a captured fly. He was exactly where he wanted to be, and I was exactly where he wanted me. Then, he moved. It wasn't a sudden lunge. It was slow, deliberate. His right hand, which had been hanging limp at his side, lifted. He brought it up to the breast pocket of his jumpsuit. The fabric rustled, a sound that seemed to echo in the dead air. My mind was screaming, "Knife! He has a knife!" I braced myself, my muscles coiling so tight they ached. I flattened myself even further against the back wall of the elevator, as if I could somehow melt into the steel. But he didn't pull out a weapon. His fingers fumbled for a second, then drew out something small and white. A plastic rectangle. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. The flickering bulb above him caught it in a brief, strobing flash of white light. It was an access card. It had the blue logo of the Beacon apartment building on it. It looked exactly like the one in my purse. The bottom fell out of my world. This wasn't a random thing. This wasn't a squatter or a drifter who had somehow found a way into a sealed-off floor. This was calculated. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. The elevator hadn't malfunctioned. It had been called here. This floor, this 13th floor, wasn't a glitch. It was a destination, his destination, and he had a key to the building, a key that could get him anywhere. A key that meant he wasn't an outsider who had broken in, he was an insider who belonged. He could be anyone, one of the maintenance staff I passed in the lobby and barely glanced at. A neighbor. He had access to the entire building. He could walk the halls. He could stand outside my door. He could know my schedule. The thought made my skin crawl and a cold, sick feeling pool in my stomach. The safety I had felt in the Beacon, the security of the key cards and the 24/7 guards, it all evaporated in an instant. It was a lie, a flimsy cardboard wall I had built around myself, and he had just shown me he could walk right through it. He didn't swipe the card on anything. He didn't need to. He just held it up, displaying it to me. It was a statement. I belong here, you don't. I control this space. I control this elevator. And now, I control you. He wasn't looking at me with a blank face anymore. As my terror mounted, something in his expression shifted. The corners of his mouth turned up in a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. It was a smile of satisfaction. of a job well done, of a plan coming together perfectly. The hunter who has finally cornered his prey and is taking a moment to savor the fear in its eyes before the final pounce. My mind finally broke free from its paralysis. The logical part that had been trying to make excuses was gone, replaced by a screaming, frantic instinct to survive. Run, fight, do something, but the control panel was dead. The door was wide open. The only way out was through him. I glanced to the side, at the emergency panel. The red alarm button I had pressed uselessly before. And next to it, something I hadn't even registered in my initial panic. A metal lever, painted red, inside a small glass box. The glass had a tiny metal hammer chained next to it. The label read, "Emergency stop." It wasn't for calling for help. It was for killing the elevator's power completely. A last resort. My eyes darted from the lever back to the man. He saw me look. His smile widened. He knew what I was thinking. And he knew I was too late. He lowered the keycard, slipping it back into his pocket with that same, slow, maddening calm. Then, he took a step forward. And the sound started again. That awful, rhythmic, dragging sound. Chef-F, the sound of the heavy canvas tarp, and its lumpy, human-shaped contents, being dragged across the rough concrete floor. Scrape, shish ffffffff. He took another step. He was a predator, and his patience had run out. The time for savoring was over. He was coming for me. Each step was unhurried. Each drag of the tarp behind him was a punctuation mark on my impending death sentence. The distance between us, which had seemed like a small buffer zone, was shrinking with terrifying speed. 10 yards became 9. 9 became 8. The flickering bulb cast his long, distorted shadow into the elevator, a creeping tide of darkness that washed over my feet, climbing up my legs. I was drowning in it. He wasn't just a man in a hallway anymore. He was an inevitability, and he was coming to collect me. That sound, chef-F, scrape, chef-F, scrape. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was the soundtrack to my life ending. Each drag of that canvas tarp across the gritty concrete was a second ticking off my clock. Time got weird then. You know how people say their life flashes before their eyes? It wasn't like that for me. It was more like my brain just split. One part of me was detached, watching this happen like it was a movie. A really, really bad, low-budget horror movie. The other part was an animal, cornered and screaming inside my skull, a raw, silent scream that had nowhere to go. The man kept coming. He wasn't rushing. That was the worst part. He was taking his time, as if the outcome was already decided. As if my terror was a nice little appetizer before the main course. The flickering light from the hallway bulb caught his face in strobing bursts of shadow and pale skin. That empty, nothing there expression was back, the smile gone, replaced by a look of sheer, methodical purpose. He was a man with a job to do, and I was the job. My eyes, which had been locked on his, darted away. It was a reflex. I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't look at the thing he was dragging. My gaze shot back to the control panel, to the useless, dead buttons. Closed door, alarm, lobby, nothing. They were just plastic squares. Meaningless. And then I saw it again. The little red lever, emergency stop. The glass over it seemed a mile thick. The tiny metal hammer chained beside it looked like a toy. It was an emergency protocol for maintenance crews, not for this. Not for when a monster who has a key to your building is dragging a body down a phantom hallway to come and get you. Logic, what little I had left, told me it was a stupid idea. What would it do? Just trap me in here with the doors open? Make it easier for him? Chef-F, scrape. He was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. I could smell the dust he was kicking up. It was a dry, chalky smell, like an old basement. Underneath it, there was something else. Something coppery and sick. Logic didn't matter anymore. Logic wasn't going to save me. The part of my brain that was still an animal took over. It wasn't a thought, it was a command that bypassed my conscious mind entirely. Do it, now. My hand shot out, clumsy and shaking. I fumbled for the little hammer. My fingers felt like fat, useless sausages. The chain was short. I swung it. Tink. The hammer bounced off the glass. It didn't even leave a mark. A sound escaped my throat then. A pathetic little whimper. It was the first sound I had made, and it was loud in the silence. His head tilted slightly. He heard it. He stopped dragging the tarp. He just stood there, watching me. Waiting. Almost curious. Okay. Fine. I pulled my hand back, made a fist, and I just punched it. punched the glass as hard as I could. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed in the metal box, followed by the sting of pain shooting up my arm. Glass didn't shatter into a million pieces like in the movies. It just cracked, a spiderweb of fractures, and a chunk of it fell away, leaving a hole big enough for my hand. I didn't feel the cuts. I didn't feel anything except the sickening, frantic pulse of adrenaline. He started walking again, faster this time. Shush scrape, no more patience. Playtime was over. I shoved my hand through the jagged opening. My fingers closed around the red metal lever. It was cold and solid. Real. It was the only real thing in the world. I gripped it so hard my knuckles were white. And I pulled. For a second, nothing happened. A horrifying, gut-wrenching second where I thought, that's it. It was all for nothing. He was 10 feet away. I could see the frayed collar of his jumpsuit. Then, the world ended. A violent, bone-jarring clunk came from somewhere above me, like a giant gear had been stripped. The elevator car shuddered so hard I was thrown against the wall. The main lights didn't just flicker, they exploded in a pop of white, plunging me into absolute, total darkness. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was a dead, suffocating silence. No hum of electricity, no buzz of the lights, not even the sound of him dragging the tarp. Just the sound of my own harsh, ragged breathing in a black, metal coffin. And then, a new sound. A low, electronic hum. A single, dim, red emergency light flickered on above the control panel. It cast everything in a hellish, bloody glow. The elevator groaned, long, deep protest of tortured metal. And then we started to move. Not up, down. It wasn't a smooth descent. It was a fall, a controlled free fall, the emergency brakes fighting against gravity. The doors, which had been gaping open, began to slide shut. Slowly, painfully, agonizingly slowly. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I watched the gap of the dark, flickering hallway shrink. 5 feet, 4 feet, 3, a blur of motion. He wasn't slow anymore. He lunged, a dark shape covering the remaining distance in an instant. Just as the gap narrowed to a foot, a hand shot through. A grimy, grease-stained hand, fingers splayed wide, slammed against the edge of the closing door. It stopped the door's progress for a fraction of a second. The system fought back, the motor whining in protest, trying to complete its command. The arm followed the hand. An arm in a dirty blue sleeve, straining, muscles bunching, trying to force the doors back open. He was impossibly strong. I screamed. It wasn't a whimper this time. It was a raw, primal roar of pure terror and fury. I was an animal, and this was my cage, and he was trying to get in. I didn't think. I reacted. I was wearing my work heels. Not stilettos, but solid, chunky heels. I lifted my foot and I kicked his hand. The one splayed against the door. My heel connected with his knuckles with a wet, solid thud. He grunted, a sound of pained surprise from the hallway, but the hand didn't move. The doors were still trying to close, a half inch at a time. The gap was maybe 8 inches now. I could see his forearm, thick with muscle and dark hair, straining against the steel. So I kicked again, and again, and again. I kicked his wrist, his forearm, wherever I could land a blow. It was a frantic, wild dance of survival in the blood-red emergency light. I was sobbing, screaming, kicking, my whole world narrowed down to this one violating limb in my sanctuary. Get out, get out, get out. My heel slammed into the soft part of his inner wrist. His arm buckled for a second. The pressure lessened, and the elevator door seized its chance. With a final, terrible groan, the heavy steel slabs slammed together with all the force of the emergency system behind them. They didn't just meet, they met on his arm. The sound is something I will never, ever be able to get out of my head. It wasn't loud, it was a dry, sharp, intimate sound. R-R-R-A-A-A-C-K. It was the sound of a thick branch snapping. The sound of a chicken bone breaking, magnified 1,000 times. It was the unequivocal, sickening sound of a large bone, or maybe two, giving way under immense, unforgiving pressure. A scream tore through the air from the other side of the door. But it wasn't a roar of anger. It was a choked, gurgling shriek of pure, unadulterated agony. It was cut short almost immediately, as if he had collapsed. The arm was gone, the door was sealed, I was alone, I was safe. The elevator was still falling. It was picking up speed now, the safety brakes screeching against the rails. The red light flickered, casting my shaking shadow against the walls. I scrambled to the farthest corner and slid down to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees, making myself as small as possible. I was crying, but the tears were silent. I was just shaking, a full-body tremor I couldn't control. My teeth chattered violently. I stared at the sealed doors, at the thin line where they met, half expecting them to be pried open again. The fall felt like it lasted an eternity. The building was screaming past me. Floor 11, floor 10, floor 9. The numbers on the dim display weren't lighting up, but I could feel it, feel the floors whipping by in a blur of concrete and steel. The screeching of the cables got higher, more frantic. The cabin rattled and shook, threatening to tear itself apart. Then, the end came with no warning. There was no slowing down. Just a stop, an impact so sudden and absolute that it felt like we'd hit the center of the earth. Boom! The sound was a physical blow, a concussive blast that ripped through the cabin. I was thrown forward, my head smacking hard against the opposite wall. The single red emergency light didn't just flicker this time, it went out for good. And then, there was only blackness. And silence, a heavy, ringing silence in the pitch dark. The smell of burnt ozone filled the air. I was on the floor, somewhere in the crumpled darkness of the elevator car, my head throbbing. I was out, but I wasn't free. I was trapped in a dead metal box, at the bottom of the building, with the memory of a snapping bone and a choked scream from the phantom floor above. And for a long, terrifying moment, I had no idea if I was the only one in here. The first thing I registered wasn't pain. It was silence. A thick, heavy, absolute silence that you only get when everything, every single piece of humming, whirring machinery, suddenly dies. It pressed in on my ears, a physical weight. Then came the ringing, a high, thin whine that started somewhere deep inside my skull. And the smell, burnt plastic and hot metal, the sharp, ozone stink of fried electronics. I was on my side, my cheek pressed against the cold, slightly sticky floor of the elevator car. The blackness was total, not dark, but a true, deep space absence of light. My head throbbed with a dull, booming rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I tried to push myself up and a wave of dizziness washed over me, so intense the darkness seemed to spin. My hand came away from my head wet. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the sticky warmth. Blood. Great. For a long, terrifying moment, the thought from before the impact came screaming back. Am I alone in here? The memory of that choked, gurgling scream of pain from the other side of the door was still fresh, but what if he'd somehow... I don't know. What if I was trapped in this dead metal box with a man whose arm I had just helped shatter? I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the ringing in my ears. Nothing, just my own ragged breathing and the frantic drumming of my heart. Okay, move. I had to move. I crawled on my hands and knees, my palms skating over the smooth floor until they hit the cool steel of the doors. I pushed. Nothing. I felt along the seam, the place where his arm had been. It was sealed tight. I balled up my fist and banged on the door, a weak, pathetic sound in the dead air. Help! My voice came out as a croak, raw and torn. Somebody, help me, I'm in here. I banged again, harder this time, ignoring the sharp protest from my knuckles and the throbbing in my head. Help! And then, a sound from the other side. A muffled shouting. Voices. Hello? Is someone in there? The voice was distant, distorted by the layers of steel. Yes, I'm in here. I sobbed, pressing my face against the cold door. Get me out. Please, get me out. There was more shouting, the sound of running feet, and then a new noise. A scraping, wrenching sound, right at the top of the door. Metal on metal, they were trying to pry it open. It felt like an eternity. I just stayed there, curled up against the door, listening to the grunts and scrapes of the men on the other side fighting to free me. Every second stretched, filled with the fear that the doors would open and he would be standing there, waiting. Then, a crack of light appeared at the top. It was the most brilliant, beautiful thing I had ever seen. It blinded me. The crack widened, accompanied by a tremendous groan of protesting metal. Light flooded the cabin. Men in security uniforms were there, their faces a mixture of alarm and confusion. The doors were wedged open just enough for a person to squeeze through. A hand reached in. Ma'am, can you get out? I didn't need to be asked twice. I scrambled through the gap, my legs tangled, and half fell, half crawled out onto the cool marble of the lobby floor. I was a mess. My clothes were disheveled, my hair was matted with blood on one side, and I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. The night security guard, a middle-aged guy named Mike whose face I'd seen 100 times, stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "Ann, oh my God, what happened? The whole system just went down." The words came out in a torrent, a jumbled, hysterical mess that made no sense. The 13th floor, there was a man, he had a key, a tarp. He tried to get in the elevator, it fell, his arm. I pointed a shaking finger back at the mangled elevator car, which was wedged awkwardly a few feet below the lobby floor level. Mike just kept staring, his walkie-talkie already squawking. The lobby, usually so pristine and quiet at this hour, was now a scene of controlled chaos. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. Someone wrapped a scratchy blanket around my shoulders while a paramedic gently cleaned the cut on my head. "It was just a scalp wound," he said. "No concussion," he said. I barely heard him. I told my story again to a police officer, a woman with a kind but tired face and a small notepad. I tried to be coherent. I started from the beginning. Getting in the elevator, the button for floor 13 lighting up, the unfinished hallway, the man in the maintenance uniform, the tarp he was dragging, the chase, the emergency lever, the fall, the arm in the door, the sound. The snap. She listened patiently, nodding, but I could see the look in her eyes. It was the look you give a person who is clearly in shock, maybe hallucinating. When I was done, a man in a sharp suit who had been talking to Mike came over. This was Mr. Henderson, the building manager. He had an air of frantic, barely concealed damage control about him. "And," he started, his voice a little too smooth, a little too calming. "I understand you've been through a major trauma. The emergency stop system on that car clearly malfunctioned, causing a controlled drop. We're going to have engineers look at it immediately. But, I need to be very clear about something." He paused, looking from me to the police officer. "This building does not have a 13th floor. It never has. The floor plan goes from 12 directly to 14. What's in between is an unlit, unfloored, sealed technical space for plumbing and wiring conduits. It was sealed with concrete blocks during construction. The only access is a single, locked maintenance hatch on the 14th floor, and our chief engineer has the only key. Nobody has been in there for years." I stared at him. No, I was there. The elevator doors opened. It was like a construction site. There was a light. "The elevator's power systems were clearly failing," Henderson said, his voice firm. "It likely caused the lights to flicker and the floor indicator to glitch. It can be very disorienting." He was telling me I had imagined it. That the man, the tarp, the hallway, was a stress-induced hallucination. The police officer looked at me, a question in her eyes. "The security cameras," I said, my voice rising. "Check the camera in the elevator. You'll see him. You'll see everything." This seemed to be the right thing to say. The officer nodded, and soon they had a technician there with a laptop, plugging directly into the building's security hub. We all huddled around the little screen in the security office. They found the file. There I was, stepping into the elevator, looking tired. I press the button for 12. The doors close. The camera shows the elevator beginning its ascent. The floor indicator ticks past 9, 10, 11, 12, and then, at the exact moment the elevator should have stopped, the screen dissolved into a blizzard of black and white static. It was just noise, a loud, hissing, digital snow. "What is that? What's happening?" I asked, my panic rising again. "Signal interference," the technician muttered, typing furiously. Heavy, like a massive power surge right at that moment. He fast-forwarded through the static. It lasted for what felt like minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, an image flickered back onto the screen. It was a view from the same camera, but now it was tinted blood red from the emergency light. The elevator doors were sliding closed, and there, on the floor in the corner, was me, huddled in a ball. The footage was clear right up until the final impact, when the camera feed cut out for good. It came back online when the doors were pried open in the lobby. The static had erased him. There was no man, no shadowy hallway, no arm in the door. The official record showed me getting into an elevator, having some kind of episode during a massive power failure, and crashing. I went home with my parents that night. The police report was filed as an industrial accident. An inquiry was opened into the elevator company. My story, the part about the man on the non-existent floor, was chalked up to trauma and shock. They searched the entire building. They found nothing. No man in a maintenance uniform who wasn't on the duty roster. No mysterious tarp. No blood in the 14th floor maintenance hallway. They did find something, though. Something small. The officer called me a day later to follow up. We did find one thing, she said. When the repair crew was cleaning out the elevator car in the shaft, they found this wedged in the door's track mechanism down in the pit. A silver locket. It's pretty crushed, but it's a woman's locket. Does it mean anything to you? No, I said, my heart pounding for a reason I couldn't name. It's not mine. A week passed. A week of sleeping with the lights on in my childhood bedroom, of jumping at every creak of the floorboards. I was safe, but the feeling of safety was gone, maybe forever. I had to go back to my apartment to get more of my things. I couldn't live there anymore, but my life was still packed in boxes on the 12th floor. My dad went with me. While he was in the apartment, I waited in the lobby, unable to bring myself to get into another elevator just yet. I stood by the front doors, looking out at the street, wanting to be anywhere else. My eyes drifted over to the community bulletin board next to the mailboxes. It was covered in takeout menus, ads for dog walkers, and official notices from management. And one flyer, a faded sheet of paper I'd walked past 100 times without really seeing. Have you seen me? It was a missing person poster. It had been up for a few weeks, the corners starting to curl. A young woman, maybe a few years older than me, with kind eyes and a bright, pretty smile. Last seen entering her apartment building on the evening of October 12th, the text read. Lived in apartment 10C. Apartment 10C, 2 floors below me. My blood ran cold. I stepped closer, my eyes glued to the photograph. It was a good picture, a happy picture. The woman was wearing a simple black t-shirt, and around her neck, catching the light, was a delicate silver chain. Hanging from the chain was a small, heart-shaped silver locket. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The quiet hum of the lobby faded into a roar in my ears. The police officer's voice echoed in my head. A silver locket, pretty crushed, wedged in the door's track mechanism. The sound, the snap, the shriek of agony. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a ghost on a phantom floor. He was real. He had dragged that poor woman's body up to the sealed-off technical level to dispose of it. The tarp wasn't for me. I was just an interruption. My elevator had opened the door to his workshop. He wore a maintenance uniform. He had a keycard. He could be a resident, a contractor, even one of the staff. He could be anyone. The horror wasn't over. It hadn't ended in that crash. I hadn't escaped the monster. I had just met him. And he was still here, somewhere in the building, walking the halls, waiting for the next person to get in the elevator alone.